Salvete omnes, that means hello everyone in Latin. My name is Joe Giambrone, and welcome to an episode here on ScholaLatinae. Uh, Today we're going to be doing an introduction to the Latin and Greek languages. And you see lingua up on top, that means language in Latin. It's where we get words like linguistics and language and bilingual. Um, I am a recently graduated high school senior out of Chicago, Illinois. I've taken Latin since kindergarten, and I very much enjoy the Latin language. So to get started, here's a tree of the Indo-European language family. And so you see here at the base is where we call it Proto-Indo European, is this hypothetical reconstructed language. And that kind of splits off into the two, the Indo part and the European part. And so in the Indic languages, right, you have Hindi and a lot of other languages spoken throughout the Middle East and the Indian subcontinent. But over in the European part, you see we have the Germanic branch, and that goes directly to this big old English tree branch. And you see English then is very closely related to languages like German and Dutch in its Germanic language family, and also, Swedish and everything. Also in the European language family is Greek, which is really the only main Hellenic language. So it is related to all these other Indo-European languages, but not super closely. And then we also, of course, have Latin down here in the Italic branch. And Latin is, of course, the root of all these Romance languages: Romanian, Spanish, Portuguese, Italian, French, among some others. Um, and there have also been, of course, a lot of influences from Latin into English. And you see other European languages. We have Armenian, Albanian, all the Slavic languages like Russian and Polish. And these are all related. And so we can see, starting off with Latin and Greek, it's good to know the alphabets. Um, Latin, the Latin alphabet is used in English currently. We've made a few additions or slight changes since the classical times. For example, I and J, we now say are distinct letters, and U and V, we say are distinct letters, and W honestly didn't really exist back then. But then you see the Greek alphabet. I'm going to move my camera a little so you can see it. The Greek alphabet looks similar to the Latin alphabet, but it's a little different. And if I move my camera back, you can see here's a fun little comparison you might get a kick out of, like characters that are used in the Latin alphabet, the Greek alphabet, and the Cyrillic alphabet, which is the Cyrillic alphabet used in Russian and other East Slavic languages. And in terms of writing out these languages, in English, you pretty much just write the words and that's it. In Latin and Greek, there are a couple of accents or diacritics that are used to mark special things in pronunciation. So for example, up here in Latin, we have populus versus populus. That's a macron right on top. That makes a vowel long. Populus is people, and populus is a poplar tree. And then, of course, we have advenit and advenit. Advenit is the present, like he arrives. Advenit is the perfect or past tense, he has arrived. And then there are a couple of Greek peculiarities. One is that a long alpha or an eta or an omega followed by an iota. The iota turns into what's called an iota subscript, and it's just written with a little mark right below those. And then there's also marks to indicate rough breathing, which is on top of this omicron here, and like smooth breathing, which is on top of this epsilon. So that's the difference between hodos and ech, where you pronounce that H in front. And we also do have a couple accents beyond just the macron to indicate stress. Originally, these were meant for different tones, but as time has moved on, they've all just become kind of like a generic stress. So there's, hodos with the acute accent here, versus here's a what they call a circumflex on top of this eta and this epsilon here. And a grave accent, which is like a reversed acute accent on this eta. And those really are all just different ways of marking stress. And something I forgot to mention, if you look at the word alphabet, kind of looks familiar to the first two letters of the Greek alphabet, alpha and beta, is because in fact alphabet does come from alpha and beta. So a little fun tidbit there. Okay, so now you know how to write and how to pronounce. Another big part of learning these languages, right, is looking at the grammar. So I have the Latin and English for the first couple of lines of Virgil's Aeneid, which is perhaps the most famous work of classical literature to have ever been written. And you see the opening lines are arma virumque cano in Latin, but in English it's I sing of arms and the man. And so what's interesting is that the word cano is how we're translating I sing, right? Or I should say I sing is how we're translating cano. But all the information about like who's singing, right, when they're singing, that's all contained within this verb, right? And also notice that the verb is kind of at the end of this phrase, the arma virumque cano. It's not cano arma virumque. And so Latin word order is certainly more flexible than English. In English there's the classic like um, man bite dog versus dog bite man. Completely changes the meaning. In Latin, they don't use word order to determine meaning in a sentence. What they actually use are inflections. And so for nouns and adjectives, we have what were called declensions. And so, whether it's singular or plural, and then these are cases, a nominative, genitive, dative, accusative, ablative, and those cases determine like the function in the sentence. So for example, the nominative is just the subject. So if you're saying the star is in the sky, you would use stella. The genitive often shows like possession. So for example, like the bright light of the star, you'd use stella, and so on. There's a lot of different endings you can use, and that shows like how that word is used in the sentence. And so there's a lot more freedom with how you're constructing these sentences to get the right emphasis and intention across without worrying about word order. For adjectives, it's the same thing. You decline them in their declensions, and you also notice that Latin has three genders, three grammatical genders: masculine, feminine, and neuter. And so the adjectives will decline in all three of those. And over on the verb side of things, all of this is verbs right here. I'll move so you can get the full picture. Verbs are in what we call conjugations, and so you conjugate them instead of declining them. And you see there's, like I was mentioning with Kano, there's a lot of information that you can pack in just one word. So, if you want to say you all are being loved, you would just say amamini, right? If you want to say something simple like I love, just amo. And so there's, again, a lot of information you can pack in these verbs to get the desired meaning across. And it looks like a lot of forms. It's not too bad. Once you start looking at them, there are a lot of patterns that show up. Same with the nouns. And of course, Greek also has declensions and conjugations. A notable difference, though, is that in Greek declensions, there's also a dual, which is, singular is one, plural is many. Dual is exactly two. And another thing that's interesting is that, we had this ablative case, which I'm not going to go into detail with now. It's kind of the kitchen sink case. A lot of things use the ablative in Latin. However, in Greek, there is no ablative. And then the Greek conjugations, there's a middle system, which is kind of like that in between active and passive. There's a lot of distinctions between Latin and Greek that we will be sure to explain to you in future videos. Of course, before you get into actually inflecting these, you got to look at the vocabulary. And so a lot of the vocabulary you'll see kind of comes in these flashcard forms where you have what's called a dictionary entry on one side and their English definitions on the other. And so, for a verb, these are the three words that we had on the Latin slide. For a verb, amo, amare, amavi, amatus tells you everything you need to know about how to, sorry, did not mean to click that far, how to conjugate it in this way, in all of these forms. And then, stella, stellae, using that we can have all of these forms, and bonus, bona, bonum gives us all of these forms. And in the modern day, we want to think, okay, how is Latin being used, or how is Greek being used? Why should I care about this? And there's a couple of reasons. First off, there's a lot of Latin and Greek phrases that are used in modern day. For example, the current year, as of recording, is 2023 AD, Anno Domini. I just said, for example, I could say exempli gratia, e.g. And then my personal favorite is etymology. And etymology is the study of word origins. It comes through Latin from Greek, ultimately, etymos and logia. So technically it means like the study of truth, which I think is kind of fun. But learning Latin and Greek will it'll make you a better English speaker and thinker and writer, and you'll be able to understand more complex words and know how to construct more words and what they mean ultimately. And so there's a lot of benefits in that. And with that, I'm going to say Volete omnes, which means goodbye, everyone. This is finis, which is the end. And I thank you for your time, and I look forward to seeing you in some future Schola Latinae videos. So, take care.